Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock on March 11, 2022. This is a work session on the transmittal of resolution supporting of our downtown, Anchorage's downtown district plan. And let's go ahead and take the roll. We didn't do that at the last work session, did we?
We did not. Ms. Allard. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Kennedy. Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Presberdia. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
And Ms. Zalatel. Here.
Go ahead around the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine Bonnell, Long Range Planning Division Manager.
And Craig Lyon, Planning Director.
All right, since this is a work session on the Our Downtown plan and we have the Our Downtown hero, Christine Bonnell, in the room, I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Assembly members. I am Christine Bonnell, Long Range Planning Division Manager, and here today with our Planning Director, Craig Lyon, to present on Assembly Ordinance 2022-27 and ordinance to adopt the Our Downtown Anchorage Downtown District Plan 2021 and update to the 2007 Downtown Comprehensive Plan. Copies of this PowerPoint presentation, resolutions of support, and the Our Downtown Trends Report were just distributed to you. You all received a hard copy packet with the public hearing draft plan about a month ago. We wanted to get you the Trends Report because it provides a snapshot in time into the population, demographic, and economic reality of 2020 when this plan was initiated. The Trends Report also details implementation of the 2007 Downtown Plan, action items, and other successes that have occurred since 2007. I will talk a bit about the Trends Report in slides number 4 and 5. However, before I present on the plan today, I would like to acknowledge the lands that we stand on. It is with gratefulness and respect the planning team wishes to acknowledge the traditional homeland of Dena'ina Athabascans and the contributions Alaska Native peoples make to our community and society today. We would especially acknowledge the traditional importance of the area considered for this downtown plan and for Ship Creek as the traditional first salmon ceremony site. It took a great planning team and many supportive stakeholders to complete this plan review and update. These stakeholders participated in one-on-one interviews and in several working groups and subcommittee meetings. Our timeline began with the project in January 2021. We kicked it off with a Zoom meeting, and then that's when our website was launched. Not shown here on this list of meetings are some of the one-on-one meetings and interviews that transpired in 2019 and earlier in 2020. So with the public meetings, I have been meeting monthly with the Downtown Community Council, and that's been going on now we're like best friends at that community council meeting, right, Mr. Constant? I've also attended the Government Hill and the Fairview Community Council meetings. Our kickoff and plan rollout, there was a couple of meetings on that one. The urban design and utility subcommittees, we met 5 times with them. We had what we call the director's draft plan review, and that was all the directors of ACDA, the Downtown Community Council, Fairview Community Council, Anchorage Downtown Partnership, Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. All of those folks attended the director's rollout. We also have a gap funding working group. I'll talk a lot about that a little bit later. And then we made several agency and presentations. There were at least 7 of those. I'm probably missing a couple. So also stakeholders in this planning process were the Chamber, were Visit Anchorage, First National Bank, ADA, AHFC, all the utility companies participated with us, all the different MOA departments that operate in downtown, DOT and public facilities, Native Village of Eklutna, and the Third Avenue Radicals. And then there's quite a few other acronyms there on this list. and of course, the Planning and Zoning and you, the Assembly, Debenham Properties, Widener Apartment Homes, and Aret LLC were partners also in this. So what is what was our guidance on updating this downtown plan? Well, in code, so this was an update. It wasn't a total redo of the plan. And so AMC 2103.070.b.2 describes a targeted plan review, which is supposed to happen every 10 years. And then that's initiated by the director. And what we're supposed to consider in doing that targeted review is any rezonings, any economic and demographic trends that have changed, recent and proposed land use decisions, or adopted plans and studies. So those are all the things that we looked at. And with that targeted review, we chose to review the plan section by section, chapter by chapter, to determine what could be kept, what could be updated, and what new content needed to be included based on the public comment and the stakeholder input we were receiving. We used a subject matter approach when discussing several issues, including utility coordination, urban design, and market rate housing financial feasibility. The subcommittees that we worked with were presented with a set of issues developed from public comment and stakeholder input. Results from those subcommittee efforts were updated goals, recommendations, and new action items. We also held an online survey for the plan, and that included questions specific to the 2007 downtown plan and any of the implementation actions that were in that plan. Several open-ended opportunities in the survey were allowed for folks to comment. The survey was taken by over 300 people and resulted in over 1,200 comments. So as I noted a couple of minutes ago, the trends report, that was the foundation for this targeted plan review. We started with information from that trends report. So what are the population, demographic trends? What recent changes were being reported from AEDC? And then we also had Agnew Beck complete a downtown Anchorage residential market analysis. And that residential market analysis led to some of the recommendations that we're making for housing. The trends report went into depth on what was accomplished in downtown since 2007. And those topics came under like I said, the status of the downtown plan implementation, other downtown related plans and studies that have been adopted, and any adopted or proposed land use decisions. And those land use decisions include the 4-unit housing tax incentive that you all adopted, the Ship Creek Framework Plan, and the Anchorage Original Neighborhoods Historic Preservation Plan, and also the former Native Hospital Site Master Plan.
Quickly, Christine, do you mean 8 units?
Excuse me?
The 8 units tax abatement? You said
No,
4?
the 4-unit housing tax abatement.
Did we do a 4-unit one?
Yeah, it's 4 units.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was 8. Okay. Keeping it all on track is tough. Thanks.
So, excuse me, up on the screen from the trends report.
One last thing, Mr. Dunbar arrived with us at 1:02. He's been here since we started.
Oh, okay, thank you. So in the trends report, we also talk about, well, what are the successes? What else has been done? And so things like the Downtown Edge, 22 new homes, Conchi Place, 28 homes, the multi-million-dollar museum renovation, the 6th Avenue Transit Center project that's going to be happening. We had the Town Square Park Master Plan adopted. Anchorage Downtown Partnership had a successful membership drive over the last year. We've had over 100 events in programming over the last few years in downtown. The Anchorage Railroad renovated their historic terminal, and that's in use today for everybody to enjoy. The Anchorage Historic Preservation Commission, you all helped them adopt the local landmark register ordinance. I'm not gonna read the rest of these, but since 2007, there's a lot that's been done in downtown. People have been focused on downtown, and we've had a lot of successes there. What we didn't have, though, from the downtown plan and what the downtown plan forecasted in 2007 is 3,400 new hotel units, 2,500 new housing units, an additional 2.4 million square feet in retail space, or 270,000 square feet of, 2.4 million in office space and 270,000 square feet in retail space. So those are the things that we're missing from that 2007 plan that weren't able to come through. Anchorage entered the 2008 recession later than the lower 48, and just as we were recovering from COVID, COVID hit. So with that list, like AEDC likes to say, it's not all bad news.
Yeah, and if you have to keep saying it, maybe you're trying to convince somebody.
It's not all bad news. Okay, so getting back to that targeted review, like I said, some elements of the plan were kept, some updated, and new goals, policies, maps, and actions were introduced. What was kept were the overarching goals. What was updated was the study area boundary map. Planning factors were renamed to development factors. The 2007 guidelines, we updated some of those, and many of the 2007 implementation actions. What's new in this plan is strategies recommended from Oklahoma City and Smart Growth America, early action items, and some new goals and policies and actions from our recently adopted plans that I mentioned earlier. So page 47 in the plan gets into the strategies. And again, this was from Oklahoma City and also from Smart Growth America. Both of those agencies visited Anchorage in 2016. 2016 was kind of a big year for us. I think the Rose Foundation group also visited that same year. And so the 6 strategies that we decided to introduce into the plan are strategy 1, focus the effort. Strategy 2, build great housing. Strategy 3, get important input from women in the community. Strategy 4, lead by example. Strategy 5, make connections to surrounding neighborhoods. And strategy 6, make downtown safer. And throughout each of the chapters in the plan, each of these strategies or some of the strategies are touched on in this plan. The primary strategy, though, in the plan is focus the effort, and this plan speaks to that throughout. And that's because both Oklahoma City and the Smart Growth America folks stated time and again that a thriving downtown is what it takes to turn a whole city around economically and demographically. New development focused on downtowns brings new housing, jobs, and tourism opportunities across our community. Chapter 1 of the plan is the introduction and the early action items. Chapter 2 is just a very brief explanation of the existing conditions. And again, that's from the trends report. Chapter 3 goes big on focusing the effort. The map that you see up there on the screen is our revitalization strategy map. There's policies associated with that, and then action items associated with that. Prioritizing our CIPs, a downtown investments program, and then the Housing Gap Trust Fund, which again, we'll talk to you about a little bit later. There's 2 focused development sites on this map. That's the large blue rectangle and then the yellow kind of blue area on the map. The blue is an extension of the A Few Good Blocks strategy that we had from Smart Growth America starting in 2016. And then the yellow is the Fairview East Downtown Tax Abatement Zone. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Christine, before we move on, I know you said something that intrigued some members. Can you kind of highlight what the Housing Gap Trust Fund concept is a little bit more?
Yeah, can we wait for a couple more slides?
Yes.
Is that possible? Because I get into it hot and heavy here.
Okay.
All right, good, thanks. Okay, so there's 4 cultural districts that we're suggesting on this map, and then there's 16 different opportunity sites for redevelopment on this map. So again, this is a new map in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is our kind of like our land use chapter. This includes a new land use plan map and the description of the current and expected types of development that could occur in the land use districts. And this gets a little bit to what you all were talking about in your previous work session. The districts and sub-districts on this map are based on the 2007 Downtown Plan Strategy Diagram, and then subsequent plans adopted, including the Ship Creek Framework Plan and the original 4 Neighborhoods Historic Preservation Plan. Chapter 5 is a new chapter that was originally the programs chapter. That was Chapter 7. We've moved it up to Chapter 5. We call that the Quality of Life chapter. This was done in response to the many quality of life comments and action items that we received during this planning process. This chapter responds to changes in visitor travel and makes a nod to nomad workers coming to Anchorage. Marketing, branding, events, safety, wayfinding, and the proposed cultural districts are described more in depth in this chapter. Chapter 6 is our urban design chapter, and northern city design is encouraged by the plan. It remains that way. Minor updates to the 2007 design guidelines are in this chapter, and we may find that we'll update those design guidelines once we get further on to the downtown code update. New in this chapter is this street typologies map that helps us articulate the connection between buildings and streets. Action items in this chapter were directly from the utility and urban design subcommittees, and there's new policies and actions included. Chapter 7 is our transportation and circulation chapter. Not a lot of this changed. However, we did introduce the idea of the different street typologies from the National Association of City Transportation Officials. The acronym for that is NACTO. And recommendations for major and minor streets are included in this, and they align particularly with the complete streets policy that the Muni already has adopted. This was in response again to public comment. New policies and transit, including related to transit, bicycle, pedestrian, and street action items are updated with this chapter. A primary action item is the funding and completion of the downtown streets engineering study proposed by this plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the early action items are in Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is our implementation chapter. And the early action items, many of them are based on what we heard from the public. And so what they were asking for is for us to continue to invest in that Few Good Blocks area. That was that large blue area I showed you on that previous map. They want us to create a utility coordination process. We heard that both from the utility companies and also the development community. We want to make sure that we fund and complete the downtown zoning code update, and we're in the process of actually doing that right now. Also important is to identify and establish new sources of funding, and we've got a draft report under review on that one right now. And then complete the downtown streets engineering study. We've asked for TIP funding on that, and then update historic and cultural information. Okay, so then an element of the downtown code update, and this is going to lead me into answering that question. An element of the downtown code update was the completion of a buildable lot capacity study. And the map that you see up right now is the several buildable lots that we performed this capacity study on. And that's where we have an estimate of actually how much housing could potentially be built in downtown. All right. So including that buildable lot capacity study, we worked with Bettisworth North to complete that study. And then they also, we asked them to visualize what could actually be built in some of these lots if the downtown code was updated. So this slide and the two following slides visualize what types of mixed-use development could occur at different locations on 5th and 6th Avenues and L Street and 9th Avenue between D and E. This concept is located and shows a mixed-use concept located along a bicycle-friendly street at 5th and L. The concept totally builds out the lot with commercial on the first floor. A step-back structure gives us a sunny corner on 5th Avenue, and housing is the primary focus for this design concept with 3 stories devoted to housing. This is a similar mixed-use building concept shown constructed at 6th and L, constructed on the parking lot that is next to the Anchorage Chamber. Again, the step-back structure allows a sunny corner and maintains the view shed looking to the west. Again, first floor commercial with 3 full stories of housing above. Our final design concept is my favorite because who doesn't love a brownstone? We position this one along 9th Avenue to enjoy the park strip. There's 3 adjoining lots that are out there on 9th Avenue and D Street. And what we envisioned here is a welcoming entry facing the park strip. This could be single or multifamily. Behind the brownstone is a more modern mixed-use high-density housing, offering immediate adjacency to D Street. The taller, modern 7-story structure is stepped back to give some private open space areas and maintains the views looking to the south and east. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty and talk about money and incentives. So why the focus on housing? Housing is economic development. I think we all know that. And according to AEDC and a 2014 employer survey that they hosted, housing is the foundation in which Anchorage can build a stronger economic future. Lack of affordable, available, and livable housing has been cited by many local businesses as a challenge to attracting and retaining employees in Anchorage. We know the housing demand is there. We know we are losing opportunities for new businesses and workers in Anchorage because of the lack of housing. Best practices and case studies tell us to focus on affecting that supply. Identifying and communicating a housing target in this plan is a policy choice many other cities have made to bolster downtown housing development. This plan empowers you, our community leaders, to champion the housing target and incentives that are needed to support new housing in downtown Anchorage. So our capacity study estimated that we could have around 4,700 new housing units in downtown. Our gap housing funding study that I'll be talking about recommends that we build recommends that we incentivize and help build 1,400 new market rate housing units in the next 5 to 8 years. That's going to take tax incentive amendments. It's going to take a gap trust fund to be established, and it's going to take agencies like ACDA to lead redevelopment in downtown. So the housing target, what's needed to get there? The building, to get to that number of units, we will need to amend current tax incentives, create a gap housing trust fund, and encourage ACDA to seek and enter into additional public-private partnerships on MOA-owned and potentially state-owned land in downtown. New development in downtown, including places like Fire Island, new development is moving downtown, and Fire Island is one of those examples. There's also talk of a grocery store coming to downtown, a pharmacy, and a library, and these are all elements that we need in downtown that can be very encouraging to new developers. All right, here we go. So I don't know if any of you have ever been in a meeting with Shanna and seen her pro forma. Have you guys ever been in a meeting with Shanna Zussman and seen her pro forma? Okay, here we go. So this is Agnew Beck's pro forma. they've worked across the state with several different developers and agencies in Anchorage. And this financial tool provides crucial information developers and agencies need when considering whether a project is going to pencil. The 3 downtown examples that we're showing here are based on current market rate, building current market rate housing projects, are based on 1 current market rate housing project in progress and 2 potential market rate housing projects on the lots identified in this table. The second project is on state-owned land, and the third project is privately owned land. This pro forma and its results are partially driving the recommendations in the downtown plan update and the recommendations that will be coming forward in a subsequent report from our gap funding working group. Public incentives and resources will be necessary to close the financial gap and reach the goal. We know the incentives and public investment is working to bring the Block 96 project to 8th and K. And so if you'd like me to, I'll go through this a little bit. Okay.
So are these, the first one is a real project and the other 2 are hypothetical?
Yes.
Okay. And this is per unit. So the gap is, if they build it, they're $120,000, cost is $120,000 higher than they can make money at current market rates.
So let me go
Okay.
through the table a little bit. So the gap that we know right now with this pro forma is $120,000 per market rate unit. That's the gap. That's with a project receiving about half of their funding from a loan from a bank, being able to get land that's fairly reasonable. So that's their type of an investment. And let's see. Yeah, that the gap is the 120,000. So then when you apply the 12-year tax incentive, which is that 4-year housing, the 4-unit housing tax incentive, that per unit gap goes down to $70,000 per unit. If an agency or if they're able to find patient capital and a land write down, which is happening right now with Block 96 flats with ACDA, then there is no gap.
Christine, I think you should describe for folks what you mean by patient capital.
Patient capital is a loan at a 2 to 3% interest rate for a long time. No bank is willing to loan for a long time to make 2 or 3% interest. So a public agency basically is the one that loans for that patient capital. That gets us to the Gap Housing Trust Fund. So then if we were to change that 4-unit housing to a 25-year instead of a 12-year tax abatement, we wouldn't need the patient capital, but we would need some of the land write down. So some of the land write down would be the agency that owns the land would allow them to not make any lease payments for, say, 15 years out of the 50 years that they're going to make a lease payment. Any other questions on that?
So they don't sell the land, they lease it. Is that what we do?
Put it on the mic.
Sorry. So they don't own the land, we lease it to them for 100 years. Is that what we're doing for the Debenham project? Is that what this
It's
first?
50 years.
Is his project?
Oh,
one of these-
99 years.
Oh, is his project one of these 3?
Block 96 is ours. We're not on this,
You're not on this thing. Okay.
but it is a 99-year lease.
So he has 99-year lease. He's getting the 12 years.
We did it, well, the tax abatement for the housing was the original.
Come on up. Yeah, we need you to speak into the mic.
I was just supposed to be watching.
It's okay.
Hello. Do I push the button? I'm Melinda Gant from ACDA. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So for our Block 96 project, which is everyone knows is Sean Debenham's project, that's the 48 unit apartment complex that's going to be built this summer. We took on a 99-year lease. ACDA provided the 1.8 million for the garage piece, so that filled the gap. And then he also gets the 12-year tax incentive for his units, so he doesn't have to pay property taxes on those units for 12 years. And then ACDA is not taking ground lease payments with part of that picture for to fill the gap. So this is a great example. So we kind of fell in that 12-year tax incentive window, but the developer had to also lower his return. So Sean isn't getting the normal return because he wanted to see if we could get this project built downtown. So his return, most developers we're seeing are wanting to get probably 8% at the lowest, up to about 10 to 15% return on their investment. His at the very beginning of the project, his return is quite lower than that.
Which I might add, this Mr. Constant, that when I asked for the definition of patient capital, yes, there are banks that don't want to do that, but there are in fact investors out there who have a different arc of time for their return on investment. And they're able to be more patient with their investments, which is exactly the nature of what Debenham did.
Right.
Like their investment portfolio allows them to think much more long-term than a lot of other developers.
So when your return is less than inflation, if you just hold it long enough, what? So just-
Inflation is a very hot topic right now, but I think he knows how the money works for him, and it works for him and his family and their investment portfolio.
And I think also with Sean's project, some of the expenses that most developers have to take on, he didn't, because he has also his construction business. So he just has to go out for subs. And I know that right now he is definitely challenged still with the cost of building. Lumber has gone down, but rebar and cement is still very high. And also the workforce is quite low. So his subs, his recent quotes he's gotten on his subs have come out quite higher than the original quote.
And the point that I think she made that's germane is it was wood last year and it's labor this year, and it's always something.
Yeah.
So in order for us to fulfill this target between the next 5 and 8 years of 1,400 new housing units, we'll be coming back to you to talk about the existing incentives that are actually going to sunset here in 2024. But we just wanted to talk to you about it today with the downtown plan because it's something that's so important to the downtown plan and to all of our community. And once we have some successes in the downtown area with this kind of package, I believe that we'll be able to use it throughout Anchorage to get more housing in Anchorage. So if there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and move on.
I just would point out to those who would otherwise point to that, she just made a very important point. No, that these incentives are germane to other parts of town. And so when I know the question will come up, what about Midtown? What about other parts of town? How are we going to make sure that this is fair and equitable to the rest of town? I think I heard you just say that these are germane to other parts of town. We need to make sure that as policymakers, but I understand that question will arise.
Well, again, and getting back to the success that Oklahoma City had and then other successes of other downtowns, the focus, the effort is let's get downtown good, let's get downtown growing, and the rest of our town will grow too. It's just going to happen. All right. I'll go ahead and move on. All right, so what are the next steps for the Muni and for our partners? We're going to finish our gap housing funding study and present that to you, the Assembly, with potential tax incentive amendments. We're going to be finishing the update and adopt the downtown code with your help. We would like to establish a reinvestment focus area in the downtown so utility and MOA CIPs can be directed to the redevelopment focus area, reinvestment focus area. We want to initiate the utility coordination process described in the downtown plan. Utilities can then assist us in determining what upgrades might be needed. Creating the GAP Trust Fund with an initial $5 million and the process for making short-term loans, that's your patient capital question there, could either be managed by the MOA or the Muni or by ACDA if they become our redevelopment authority. Just to bring us all back on why the focus in downtown, those red spikes are the tax that we earn in downtown. That's our value. That's our taxable value per acre by parcel in downtown. Downtown supports all of Anchorage. We make downtown healthy, and downtown will contribute to supporting all of Anchorage more than it's already doing right now. You all are the leaders and the messengers in our community. You can carry the positive message that housing is economic development, and building 1,400 market rate housing units by 2029 will be a good thing for our community. What we pilot in downtown can be used throughout the rest of Anchorage. And I'm just going to close with housing is economic development. Thank you.
Questions? Mr. Welton?
So I have a number of questions. So I've gone through this fairly carefully, and it's bleeding to death. You see my red pen. Not all bad, but I mean, I always have trouble with these things because you have a draft and it's gone through the system, but like there's 1,000 little edits, misspelling sentences in our sentences, and I'm inclined to scribble on those. And in prior life, before being on the assembly and being on committees for these, I would write them up and say, oh, here's edits, just so you would know. Now that I'm on the assembly, they become part of an ordinance, which is just stupid. How can I just note some edits and get them to you and not make them part of a ordinance? I mean, it's Scrivener's error stuff. It's just.
You can send that to me in an email, or.
If you put it in an AO, I'll be really mad.
Well, no, I think we can address just technical edits in the document. There's a bunch.
One would think.
Trust
There
me
was
already.
one case where I did that and all of a sudden it's in the ordinance and it was pages and pages. It was silly a couple of years ago. So then, but if there are things in here, I mean, this has gone through a substantial process. You've gone through it. And I go, I don't know, you've got like 4 different speed limits. Can we pick one? Things like that. And I would, how do we address that? Do I just keep my mouth shut and let it go because it's gone through all this process? But we should have a role too. And then some broader things too. I wonder, we put all these incentives forward for more housing, which is good, but then we have all kinds of rules that makes it more expensive to develop. Maybe we should loosen up on the rules. And looking at that, we have examples of successes, right? Without those rules, right? And they look really good. People built nice looking buildings. So maybe we back off on the rules and we don't need as much incentives.
Through the chair, we believe that with the code update, we're going to be able to streamline development for developers. The examples of the visualizations that I showed you, this rectangular building up there that has the 7 and the 2 on it, the white one, that building is not possible right now with our downtown code. We will not allow a rectangular building with our code right now. So that's why I've already initiated the code update, and we're going to get rid of that. It's called the bulk height requirement. Everybody has told us, get rid of it. get it out of the code. And so we're working on that right now. So you're right, have a great plan, but then you've got a code that doesn't work. That's the other thing, and I didn't talk about that with the capacity study. Bettisworth North looked at our code and what we told them we would like to see built on these lots, because we have a lot of rectangular lots. And he pointed out every single place where we needed to fix stuff. So we already have a very long list of what we need to fix in code. And I appreciate you bringing that up. As far as the speed limits, so that was carried over from the 2007 plan. And we went ahead and left it in because we're asking for the funding for that downtown streets engineering study. We feel that that downtown streets engineering study will fix all of that. You know, what does the speed limit need to be? Is Fifth Avenue going to be two-way? Can we do angle parking on our streets instead of parallel parking? Things like that. And we fully intend that that study will help us fix those kind of things.
Maybe if you get DOT to go along, and they won't. I mean, they pretty much told us in the lengthy comments that you don't get what you want unless we get highway to highway.
I would love for them to build highway to highway.
Yeah.
I would love for them to build a connector to the port.
So all this will be done in 20 years then, because it's going to take that long to do that. But I mean, that's a reality. I think they're right. You know, I mean, that was their steady comments. You get that when we get ours. And highway to highway is
I don't think anybody's stopping them from doing highway to highway.
Except their own
Public
will.
process.
No,
They're the
their own
ones that
will.
are stopping themselves,
It's
not
the public
us.
process, it's will.
Yeah.
And you know, that conversation, I started in this business because of that conversation some 15 years ago, and nothing has changed. So your in 20 years
No, I've
comment
been there
is
with you,
very
you know,
optimistic.
I'm part of the public process that
Yeah.
makes everything go slow. So I understand the issue.
Yeah, 2 out of 5 are in the room.
But that's a reality. You know, it's like we have to realistically learn to live with the highways through our town for the length of this plan. And if it doesn't recognize that or creates expectations that are different, I think we've done something wrong. I mean, that's not I like these lofty plans and these great visions and where we want to be, but
So
It's a long way down the
I
road.
think though that rather than just simply accept it is like we will talk about with my amendment for the issue of noise and housing, is we should call it out and put it in writing and state this is a concern and consideration that we don't believe we'll be able to achieve a number of these goals because the state has not acted on their priorities and hold us back. If we start to reiterate by refrain these messages, then at least it's owned by the proper people, because they will tell us, oh no, really, it's yours. You can have yours as soon as we get that.
So I put an amendment in there saying, when we get you to get rid of the highways through downtown, I will support you on highway to highway.
I don't think
Reflect
that's
that.
the way I would go, but like I'm doing with the issue of noise and residential, is I'm stating we have a conflict. The conflict is we want to have housing and we want to have a robust celebratory environment downtown. And those two things conflict with each other. Therefore, we must spend time addressing these concerns. So if you kind of shift over to the conversation about road policy and transportation policy through residential and commercial areas, we call it out that we see an ongoing conflict for decades now. We have been unable to resolve this. That then goes into the environmental documents and it's published as part of a comprehensive plan. That will hold a little bit more water than just the comment tables that are kind of dismissed. Oh, we'll get to that later. You'll get yours when we get ours. And so I think by raising it up in some very diplomatic language that I know you're a pro at, we could probably help to move the ball forward thoughtfully. It's not throwing a grenade at them. It's letting them know we're not only recognizing this a problem, but we're identifying it in our plan. And therefore, this is something we want worked on. Then it's beyond you and I. It's 20 years from now. It will be germane. I think that's a really sensible approach, better than nihilism, because it's easy to give up.
Okay. So if I don't know, did we put me in the
Meg,
queue?
go ahead.
Sorry.
I have questions.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
I have questions about the housing trust. So I'm very interested in housing trusts. I think using a trust model is a really interesting way to get at the lack of housing across the state. So as I understand it, this housing trust, the idea is that it's both for construction loans. Is that right?
Yes. So what we found, so we had several one-on-one interviews with developers. We talked with Sean Debenham. We talked with the Widener Group. We spoke with Seth from Arrett LLC. I believe we spoke with one other, and then we spoke with Alaska Housing Finance. We also spoke with Ada, find out they normally don't do housing, but now there's a way they can do housing, things like that. And so trying to figure out, and the banks were involved with our conversations too. There were a couple of banks involved, as well as AEDC, Garrett Wong, and what we asked them, what is the reality to try and fill that gap? And essentially the banks, and I think Mr. Constant pointed out that there are some investors out there, but the banks here in Alaska can't allow that 2 to 3% patient capital that goes on over time. And so the recommendation to establish a gap housing trust fund, which could be, we're asking that it's funded with $5 million, and then a process for making loans goes along with that the assembly would get a report out on, could help us fill these gaps.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions, if
Sure.
I may. So $5 million seed money, then is this the idea be internalized within the municipality? The municipality would hold the trust?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd have to get input on what. So the
That's
draft.
fine.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I think there's an interesting way to do a trust. If it sits outside of government, you have the opportunity then for public-private partnerships where you can bring in more sources of funding into the trust and build it more quickly and more easily, kind of like we did with the Funders Collaborative around homelessness. So there would be, and this is all for market rate housing, correct?
Yes.
So one of my concerns with the plan, I mean, I love a housing trust. It's one of my favorite mechanisms, but is that we're going to see an interesting socioeconomic dynamic coming into downtown for those who can afford a studio, a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom at these prices. We're going to see potentially, it's not going to be very economically diverse for downtown housing. And so that's one of my concerns, that it's not only that we need units, and I understand more units, help across the spectrum, but we're not going to be able to make affordable housing available downtown.
Well, so there is money available for affordable housing, and the 2018 earthquake funding, which that money is not being spent. The state just worked to give Cook Inlet, I'm not quite sure how much, but of the 27, that's 27 million. So you're aware of that. So, if there's 4,700 units that could be possible in downtown, and we can bring on 1,400 in the next 5 to 7 years, which is what our forecast is, or our target is, market rate, I'm sure that we're going to see folks like Cook Inlet, which they're the only ones that can actually access that EPA HUD money, because it is HUD. I foresee them building more housing in downtown too, because there's lots of lots downtown, and it just depends on how they want to move projects forward and who they're going to be working with.
Well, it's a laudable goal. Cook Inlet projects don't move quickly. So in even 1,400 new market rate units in 5 to 8 years, it's an ambitious goal. And I think that the GAP Trust Fund should be considered, if it's going to be considered to be stood up by the municipality, really needs to look citywide, because the housing issue is significant across the entire city, as well as the idea of renovating and bringing some existing properties kind of up to better livability standards might be smart investments as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about using something like a housing trust within the municipality. Be very interested again where it ultimately lives, and what can be contributed to the trust. $5 million a year, if it's meant to be an income generating trust or an invested trust, isn't going to spin off much. The typical rate is between around 4 to 4.5%, and that's pretty small amount per year off of 5 million. I'd have to get my calculator out to actually do the math. 200,000. Thanks, John. So an interesting idea. I would hope we just think bigger about it, frankly, in terms of citywide, how it can really be something, be a tool.
And again, the idea with the downtown plan is let's focus in one area, make a program work, and then use it Muni-wide.
I appreciate that, but they don't often leave downtown. Midtown's been trying to do a couple of things for a really long time, and it takes years and years and years to get an idea that started downtown anywhere else in town. So I would rather see a really great idea, born out of the downtown district plan, actually just go citywide.
Now, I would add that many of those ideas for downtown never even get used because they just don't find a market or marketability. And so it's lots of effort has gone into creating incentives that have many of them still 10 years later have never been used. And it's sad and frustrating. Finding the right mix is the hard part. Part of that is tax levels are very low in this town, despite what everyone likes to tell us on being taxed, that they're so low that the tax abatement is rarely enough to get a project over the hump. And so you have to actually be taxed high to get that to work very effectively. And so it's an interesting dilemma, but I hear what you're saying, Mr. Weddleton.
So where do you get even the 5 million for this trust?
Well, I like Ms. Zalatel's idea and go big, but we just started out with 5 million as an idea.
Not where the number came from. Where would you should pick any number? Where would it come from? I'm thinking I struggled to find $15,000 to make square our agreement with Girdwood Fire and Rescue. That's $15,000. And now we say, let's put 5 million in it. I mean, maybe it's not to say the idea is bad, but it's like, where's that money? What's our mechanism for getting that kind of money?
Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you. I think if Meg and I had our way, we would have invested some ARPA funds last year into a housing trust.
I'm not sure that would have been a legal use, but we'll know soon. Meg.
I should disclose. So in my day job, I'm part of a push to create an Alaska housing trust. And we've asked the legislature for $50 million of ARPA. Very similar idea to do construction loans and then operating capital for housing projects as well, statewide.
Power of compounding interest. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so that's the sort of creating a revolving fund where it self-perpetuates when the people pay the interest back.
Yes.
That's actually a really good idea. It's just coming up with that 50 million or 5 million or whatever. This is the seed money is the hard part. Thank you.
I think there's an interesting opportunity to use one-time federal funding to figure out a way to sustainably fund something that's kind of been elusive or an ongoing issue, both in Anchorage and statewide for a really long time. And some of the questions I asked about this trust are things that we've considered in our ask on the others, is that to keep it outside of government allows us to possibly leverage CDFI payments from banks that they need to make because they can pay into a trust. It's also interesting if a trust like this could somehow get at that issue of finding folks who don't really want to hold property for extremely low income individuals. So as we look to expand housing opportunities across the city, we do have a segment of folks who need housing, and it's always going to be subsidized, but no one wants to own those buildings. So the capital assets themselves are an interesting proposition to look at as a way to diversify what are the assets of the trust instead of just invested cash.
So we have about 4 minutes left, and I would add to that relying on a housing authority as a primary partner because they can make things work doesn't actually achieve the goal. If the goal is 1,400 units of market rate housing, your housing authorities don't actually do that. They do affordable housing, and that's their mission generally. And so they're outside of the 1,400 if we're relying on them for housing units. And that doesn't actually make a healthy neighborhood to have a vast investment in one type of housing, in particular, one economic strata. And so it's very interesting. So we have a couple more minutes for our next work session. Anything else? Hear none, I'm going to gavel us out. We'll take 5 minutes and we'll come back at about 1:05, so 7 minutes. 2:05, sorry.